Hello and welcome everyone to another Cathedral check-in from Christ Church Cathedral, Victoria, BC. With me today, I have the Reverend Rob Crosby-Shearer, who is currently the cellarer, and we're going to explain that term later, of the Emmaus Community here in Victoria. This is our monthly outreach donation recipient for the month of August this summer. And so we thought it would be a really good opportunity to learn some more about this community and what they do within the Christian world. So welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Ross. And on behalf of the Emmaus community, thank you to the whole Cathedral community. We're really grateful to be considered as the recipient for this month, and really grateful in the numerous ways that we partner with the Cathedral community. So thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to get to check in with you. I'm excited to chat.
Welcome. So I'm going to start with a question that I would have, for example. Well, one of them is just some background would be good. Briefly, how did this come about? What was the path of inspiration for this project?
Yeah, for sure. I can start with that. So, it goes back quite a number of years now to the early 2000s, where there were a group of us who really had this sense that we felt a desire to live differently, to live a bit more simply, to live with some kind of shared practice, shared spiritual practice, to live in a way that might be a little bit countercultural. And we started to try and put a framework around that. And this idea of riffing off of monasticism kind of came up. And eventually there came to be a movement called New Monasticism or Neo-Monasticism. But these conversations were happening even before that. And there was a priest of the diocese who, prior to myself coming here and prior to Megan, who's my spouse and another one of the co-founders of the community, came here, started that coming out of those conversations which had happened. I had sort of spent some time in the Catholic worker movement and in other intentional Christian communities. And what ended up happening was within the diocese, this movement or this community called the Community of the Reconciliation started. And that kind of evolved and morphed over the years into what has become the Emmaus Community. And we kind of rebooted it around 2014 into the Emmaus Community, rewrote the rule of life, and in some ways started afresh and anew. And so since that time have really just been, in a kind of slow, characteristically monastic way, trying to discern who and what God calls us to be together in our neighborhoods, in our ways of being, and establishing that rhythm of life, that rule of life that we felt called to. So it was when we did become a Emmaus community, we really did some discernment. We were taken under the wings of the Sisters of St. John the Divine, who were in town. Our first formation director was Sister Brenda, and she formed the first 5 or 6 novices in the Emmaus community through a year of formation. And then we took our first vows at that time. And so that's sort of the prehistory of what happened. We discerned as we were kind of journeying along with her that our, traditional monastic commitments, there's a number of different ones depending on which tradition you're speaking of, but poverty, chastity, and obedience are kind of the sort of most well-known one. When we were discerning, we felt that a kind of reposturing of those into prayer, presence, and simplicity would be the 3 that would work for us. And of course, as a really new monasticism or neo-monasticism is trying to take some of those core values, those core principles, that core ethos of monastic life, which involves living in community together and commitment to each other, and more importantly, a commitment to a way of being, which is both contemplative but also outward looking. And we agreed to shape ourselves in those things. And so Emmaus Community kind of came to be with this rule of life of prayer, presence, and simplicity. So that's a bit of the prehistory. We started praying I think it was Pentecost, the Monday after Pentecost Sunday in 2014. And since then, we've kind of just been moving along and, trying to figure out what the next steps are as an intentional community. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. That answered a couple of questions for me. Like, it helped define neo-monasticism and certainly carved out your path, and gives one a sense of some of the values that this might bring to our Christian community, and even to the Christian world. And I'm thinking of what you said about simplicity, just for one example. Our world is deeply troubled by covetousness and consumerism, which are kind of, vectors of the same problem. And it's
Sure.
literally destroying our planet, right? So the vow of simplicity, the notion of being content with where you are and what you have, rather than always coveting the greener grass across the pasture and always wanting to acquire, this as an influence in the world has to be a good thing.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, I think we're experiencing, and rightfully so, a lot of grief and anxiety around global heating or around climate crisis. And of course, we all know the context we've been living in the last couple of years. There's a lot of anxiety out there. So that simplicity piece is perhaps one of the more tangible pieces, and it can get a little dangerous. It can become a checklist if we're not careful. But I think you put it really nicely, Ross, that to move into a space of both inner simplicity and flowing out from that is a capacity and really grace, or to live an external simplicity is really a good thing. And the hope of doing that in community is that on a very practical level, we can share things more deeply, whether that's housing or whether that's somebody needs an onion to cook with, and we know that there's people that we can kind of lean on to do that. And our community, there are some experiments in intentional Christian community and in new monastic community which go right to a common purse. We have not gone to those lengths. And I don't think we ever will, though we do sort of talk about what the limits of simplicity and sharing are for us. But we certainly, I think, like to have that interrelatedness is maybe one way to put it, where we can live more simply, we can share a little bit. And hopefully, again, I use the word grace because I don't want it to be just another thing to do. But hopefully the grace of that gets lived out in a really beautiful way, and we experience that already in many ways, even as we sort of move step by step, take baby steps into that way of living simply. Yeah,
I think as an influence in society as well, though, it helps to balm some of the tension and anxiety around restlessness, right? I mean, part of the covetousness of life now is also not feeling rooted in any place. You're never satisfied with where you are, never mind what you have. And I like the way it traces back to that Benedictine principle of being committed to a place. Doesn't mean you're always going to be there. You might have to be, travel light and move away, but wherever you are is where you are. And the whole be here now thing, right? It's much healthier than what's kind of out there,
Yeah. In our formation, we obviously live in a pretty hypermobile culture, but in our formation, we do talk to our discerners and our novices about living as if you're here for the long haul, and commitment to place has been well, that's the hope. And we never actually do know, like you say, like at any point, given life circumstances, things can shift for people, and particularly the younger you get, because unlike certain generations where it was like, well, there was a single career and I think that probably a lot of people don't experience that if they're under a certain age level. But I do think there is something really profound about rooting in a piece of land, getting to know the people, the ecological rhythms of the land. We just read our chapter of Emmaus Community, which is our covenanted members, just read a book called The Wisdom of Stability, and it really sort of presses into that Benedictine ideal of what it means to deepen those relationships with the land, with creation, with people. and the kind of depth of Christian spirituality that can emerge out of that. So absolutely, that's been for us in Emmaus Community a real principle from the beginning. Also a struggle because the housing market in Victoria does not make it easy for a community to locate in one place. So we've sort of been trying to figure out what that means for us as a community, you know, in a situation like the one we live in. So we're coming up with creative solutions, but again, it's a kind of ongoing prayerful discernment for us as a community.
So it really constitutes a movement that could have an influence in our world, I think, and that's one of the reasons people might want to support it. And another reason that comes to mind is maybe an older reason, just the idea of I always think of monastics as a sort of a prayer machine, you know, and you know, and the idea of a rule of life, it was just something that, whether they even understand it in those terms, most practicing Christians have some version of it, right? You know, the regularity of the things you're committed to doing. And so I think it's important to have in our midst people who are focused in more intentionally on a rule of life and focused in on prayer more intentionally. I think it's almost like having an engine in your midst that just there's energy from it, and there's goodwill, and there's, you know, there's a spiritual force to it almost that it's just good to have in our midst, and I think it's good to support that personally.
Yeah, I mean, I entirely agree. And, you know, for those of us who are Anglicans, that's really embedded. It's embedded in the Book of Common Prayer, where it says, you know, from time to time, every Christian should establish this rule of life. And that's been really central for us in Emmaus. We have companions as well in our community. So I mentioned our covenanted members, but our companions do that in their own context, focused in with perhaps a different primary community than Emmaus. They're praying alongside the community. But I certainly, you know, as a person who's probably, you know, without being pejorative, kind of monastic light, I certainly take consolation in the fact that there are monastics who are committed to praying the offices 7-8 times a day, and that they are really holding the rest of us who are, you know, perhaps juggling several things, you know, in my case, parenthood and priesthood and, you know, different vocational elements to my life, where 7 or 8 times a day is probably a little bit much. But certainly, even within Emmaus Community, we do have a commitment to pray the offices. We have our own rule of life and a customary that our chapter agree to do together, and we renew that customary every year. So all of our chapter come to a prayer office 2 to 3 times a week, and you know, there's things like Eucharist, and there's also personal prayer and contemplative prayer beyond sort of our shared offices that we have as a community, and we try and balance the fact that, you know, all of us are living fairly busy lives, and even though we strive or that we seek to arc into simplicity, there is a lot of complexity still. So that prayer is really, really central, and it is heartening to hear the prayers of the community each morning. This COVID time has been a little bit of a blessing. I'm not sure long term how it will land, but, you know, we now have people all the way up the island, people in Alert Bay and Campbell River and Nanaimo, who pray alongside us and with us, you know, via Zoom. So we've now that restrictions are a little lifted, we're kind of doing a hybrid thing where we're praying either outside or in the church space, but we're also being joined by folks on Denman Island and the mainland and other places as well. So that's been a really lovely, beautiful thing, and I think hopefully a way that we can serve the wider church. That's been one of the pieces that's been really neat to see, that we can sort of, and not unlike a traditional monastery where one could come and visit and envelop themselves in the monk's prayer life. We hope that others can come alongside us and do that as well as a community.
Well, I think that might be a good note to finish on, is how can people, if they want to actually participate with your community, you know, what's the approach for them? How can they just get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we, not unlike a traditional monastic community, we invite people to a whole bunch of elements of our common lives. We
Mhm.
do regular meals. We're starting to move back into open meals probably in the fall, God willing.
Mm.
People are welcome to pray. We, early on in Emmaus, we evolved out of a weekly Eucharist, Sunday afternoon Eucharist in our living room, into a storefront, and eventually into what we call the Abbey Church. So some people, that's a kind of soft way in. We worship and have Eucharist every Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, with a full children's program. We brew beer. You know, that's kind of a fun way in. Again, inspired by that Benedictine ideal of living off the work of your hands. That's one
Yeah.
way the community tries to make ends meet, is by that kind of means. So we have a beverage collective, both Trappist inspired beer as well as non-alcohol based elixirs. And for those who are more interested in a kind of in the sort of formal process, every fall around the Feast of St. Francis, we welcome in new discerners, and it's about a year-long process of formation. We have a kind of workbook, and we meet every couple of weeks. And in between those couple of weeks, people are expected to participate as they're able in the common life of the community through prayer, through Eucharist. We do a meal at the Mustard Seed once a month, those types of ways of engaging. And then after that, if people want to become a novice, that's another year where they're kind of being formed in the community, sometimes taking on different roles. You mentioned cellarer. You promised that we would answer that. And cellarer is really just a kind of pretentious monastic term for treasurer. So I don't actually get, well, I actually do get to know how many beer there are in our production facilities, but that's not necessarily the role. The role is more to make sure that we're living simply. It's in our rule of life, actually, that those elements of our financial life need to reflect the simplicity of our vows as neo-monastic folk as well. So those kind of things I do. But anyways, I've deferred, or I've strayed from your question. Yeah, just give us a shout. Admin@emmauscommunity.ca, EMMAUS community.ca is one way to get us. Our website, we have websites for both Emmaus Community and Abbey Church. So you can kind of Google them or find them on the diocesan website if you're interested in joining us for those pieces. And we'd love to hear from you. We'll probably be starting a new cohort of discerners this fall. And yeah, folks are more than welcome to kind of join in on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Rob. It's been great to talk about this today, and I'm sure people are they will have learned a lot from this. I know I did.
Yeah.
And so, folks, if you're wanting to contribute to the Emmaus community this month at Christ Church Cathedral, Victoria, they are the recipient of our monthly outreach donation. So you can just have a designated donation to them, or just go to their website, and I guess you have a means of doing that there.
There is. You can donate on the website as well.
Either way is very good. So once again, thank you, Rob. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you to the whole Cathedral community. We've loved when we've got to work together in the past, and look forward to different kinds of creative partnerships and ways of being church together in the future. So thank you so much.
Amen to that. Thank you.
Amen. Okay.